as we were speaking, now we're coming from London. We managed to see the bathhouse. That's like the only remnant that we can say that we know for sure was of that the Jewish people that lived in London, which I later on also learned from one of the locals, that there was no special Jewish quarter in London, although there was definitely Jewish people living with the Arabs up until the end, when they were expelled and they had to leave. Not much before the expulsion of 1492, but the bathhouse was open for the Friday, so we went to see the bathhouse. Now we're going to continue on our journey, and I was going to explain also now what in Andalus at the time what they called historians like to call the Golden Age, or in Hebrew the Tkufat HaZahav. Well, this phrase was only coined in the 19th century. Before that, we find that nowhere in any other books. Like they say that no one calls that the Golden Age, because although the Jews had very good times, like with the sea, but that golden it wasn't. It came also with that. So the Arabs weren't always the kindest of other people, although that they were much better than what the Jews had to put up with in the Visigoths age. So let's begin. 711, like we said, this Tariq comes over with the Moors, and they made like a blitzkrieg, took over most of Spain, even northern Spain. And the Christians will take them 8 centuries to reconquer it, to reconquer all of it, which they call the Reconquista. At the beginning, in 711, the Jews were very instrumental in helping the Arabs take control of all these cities, and as a reward, they were also rewarded with also special status, able to free their religion, and the Jews started becoming very culturalized with the Arab language, and poetry became a big thing at that time, as we'll see in a minute or two. Poetry became very big, writing, and intellect, and there was a lot of debates between the different religions, the Christians, the Jews, and the Arabs. But not openly, they were able to actually sit down and drink a tea together and discuss topics that would be taboo in other lands and other places for the Jews and the Arabs and for the Christians, wherever they were. So part of the reason is that since this part of the world is like really, like we said at the end of the world, so the caliphs here, they were the kings of the Arabs that lived in this place. They were very, very far from the centers of Islam, like in Syria or Mecca, Medina, these places, and they would rather have better relations with the locals, for simple matter-of-fact technical and logical and logistical reasons, that they would try to keep them on their side. So, in other words, at this time, a lot of things started flourishing, like the knowledge and all that stuff, and Jews became very much busy with the language and poetry. From the first ones that we know, most famous one from after this time, he would probably be the first most famous Jew living in Spain, like Chazal call it Asfamia or Kulias Hasponin, was Chizdai ibn Shaprut. Chizdui ibn Shaprut was his name. He lived back in the 9th century, early 9th century, and he was from the city from Jaén, which we're going to see eventually when we're going to be traveling to the city where he was born, and he was also very cultured with the Arabic language, and from word to mouth it came out that this Khizdai is a very special poet, and he knows how to write very well, and till it reached the ears of the king, or the vizier of the king, and the king asked to see him, and eventually the king took him up as the one that would write all his letters to his foreign contacts. In other words, he became his foreign minister, and he actually used that position of being the foreign minister in a way that he can be instrumental in helping Jews in other places. And at this time he had heard, although he's on the other end of the world, that there was a kingdom called the Kingdom of the Khuzars. And so he sent a letter, since it was in his prerogatives, he was the foreign minister of the Caliph. He sent a letter to the king of the Khuzars, asking to know a little more about them. And there was actually found in the Cairo Geniza some of that correspondence between Khizdai ibn Shaprut and the first of the Khuzars. Ironically, there would be another one from Andalus, another great famous person that came out of this area was Rabbi Yehuda Levi, also one of the famous Paitonim. We use him in the Kinos, and the Kinos from Tzia and Aloy Sishali Shleima Silayich, and other Piyutim that we say I think but the bliss, what did they say about the bliss? There's a certain by the Blis Mila, there's a pismon that we say, also from Yehuda Levi. And there's some Piyutim throughout the year. Very famous Paitan, and he also came from this area, and he wrote the Sefer HaKuzali. In other words, it was like an explanation of the dialogue that the king of the Khuzars had with the rabbi, the priest, and the Arab his imam, I would guess, or whatever they call that. And he puts it in a question and answer format, and how the king of the Khuzars chose at the end to Judaism over the other ones. And that will be the Sefer HaKuzari. So, and with his time it also ends the golden age, because at the time of Yehuda Levi, he was the same time as the Ibn Ezra. They were also family, questionable if he was a brother-in-law or a nephew, I'm not sure. But definitely family with Ibn Ezra, and that was also the time of the Rambam when the Almohads got here, and that was the end of the golden age. But that we'll get to in a minute. So back to Khizdai ibn Shaprut. So now the 8th, this is already going back to the 9th century, and Khizdai ibn Shaprut was the one that was very instrumental in bringing also other Jews and rabbis and building Yiddishkeit here in Andalus in a way that they weren't able to do for generations because of the Visigoths. Now, after Khizdai ibn Shaprut, there was another guy called another great tzaddik. His name was Shmuel ibn Nagirol, also known as Shmuel HaNagid, famously known for the Klulei Shas that we have at the beginning of the Shas that he wrote. He was a big Talmudist, and he also ended up being the minister of the Caliph, the king of Andalus, and he was not only just minister, but he happened to be so well trained in all different knowledges that the king took him to be his general for his army. It seems like he was a great tactician. Can you imagine a Jewish rabbi, a Talmudist, also taking out the Arabs to fight in wars? Well, that's exactly what it was here in Andalus. Yeah, everything was possible. You could have been a rabbi and a doctor. you could have been a rabbi and also a general in an army, which was very rare. That's why it was that was a specialty at the time of the Golden Age. Now, the reason why they called it the Golden Age, which was coined like in the 19th century, that was by the Maskilim, like the Gretz and his friends, that they'd like to prove to the Gentiles that, you see, there was a time in Jewish history where Jews were able to assimilate into the culture, or acculture themselves to the people which they were living next to aside, the inhabitants of the region where they were living, and they brought as proof they would like to bring the Golden Age as proof for this, that you see there was coexistence between the Jews, the Arabs, the Christians at this time. But we know that that's not completely true, because there was Shmuel Hanagid's son, for example, had to run for his life, and there was different type of pogroms in different places, and Jews from Cordova had to come back to Granada, and from Granada they had to go back to the Cordova. But in general, all over, but it's true that in general the Jews had it better here than they had it in other places. And this time was all the way up to the all the way up to 1170. But before we get, just want to mention one more thing, is that there was another element here besides the Shmuel Hanagid, which was also very, very instrumental in building the Yiddishkeit here, and the yeshivas which he supported, which we also going to go visit, which is in Lucena, also known in Yiddish as Ali Sana. Kimi Ali Sana Teitze Toiro Dvar Hashem Cordova. That was a saying in those days. It was a story of the Arab Shvuyim, the 4 captives, because the Geoinim in the last time, the Geoinim in their towards the end of the time of the period of the Geoinim before of Haigon, which ended really the period of the yeshivas in Babylonia, Bovel, Sula and Pumbedisa. They had sent messengers to collect money, 4 special messengers, and they were taken captive. And one was known as Rabbeinu Chashil, the father of Rabbeinu Hananel, that we know from Shas. He was taken captive also on the ship. He was one of the 4, but he was redeemed by the Jews of Kirouan in Tunisia, and he built a yeshiva there. And then there was another one whose name was Reb Moshe, I think, and he ended up in Cairo. And there was another one that ended up on the being sold in Malaga. He was redeemed by the Jews living here in the area, and he was brought up to Cordoba, and his name was Reb Chanoich, if I remember correctly. The 4th one I forgot, where he was redeemed. And this Reb Chanoich, when he entered the shul in Cordova, there was a shir given by a Dayan. I think his name was Rabbi Nosson Dayan, and this Rabbi Nosson Dayan was giving shir in Gemara, and he got stuck. Don't forget, at that time there was no Rashi, there was no Tosfos, there was nothing. And Rabbi Chanoich stood up and he said he'll explain the sugya. And then Rabbi Nosson said, "Oh, this is not no simple captive. I'm not anymore your Dayan. This is your new rabbi." And that's how the yeshivas started moving from Babylonia here to Spain. I'm talking about Spain and Ashkenaz. The story is a little different. And so Rabbeinu Chanoich, together with Shmuel Hanagid, basically the same time, they were very, very busy in making this place, Cordova and Ali Sana, places of Talmudic learning. So much so is that we know that Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, known as the Rif, which really means Rabbi Yitzchak from Fez, he had to run away from it because of a certain libel, ended up in Spain, and he was also the Rosh Yeshiva in Ali Sana, which is not far from Cordova, or Lucena, which we will visit, Bezrat Hashem. Together with Rabbi Yitzchak Ibn Gaius, there was another 2 Rabbi Yitzchaks, also famous ones, that we're not sure of, but we know there was 4 Rabbi Yitzchaks that lived at the same time. And then their Talmud, the Rimegash, which also learned in this yeshiva, and also at Ali San next to Cordova. And the Talmud of the Rimegash will be Rav Maimon, Rabbeinu Maimon, and then the Talmud of Rabbeinu Maimon and his son, Rav Moshe, which is known as Rav Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, that lived up until his time, until the 1120 or 1130, when we get the Almohads, which is some fanatical type of group, Akka, ISIS, that show up here in Andalus, and they say enough of this coexistence, either we accept Islam or get out of here. And if you do stay, then you're liable to death. So we get the Rambam fleeing from here, from this area. The Rambam flees south to Morocco. Same time, the Ibn Ezra flees north to the Christian Spain, which the Christian parts up to Navarra and then into France, and then even as far as England. But the Rambam takes a different route. He goes with his father Maimon. He was a young man. I don't know if he was 20 yet, and he leaves towards Fez because of these Almohads that they weren't gonna profess that they are Muslims. But most of the Jews living here did profess in the open to be Muslims, and they said, yes, okay, what do I have to do for it? They said, yeah, you have to say that Muhammad is a prophet. Okay, Muhammad is the prophet. What else do we have to do? So nothing, you have to show up to mosque every once in a while. Alright. So the Jews, they basically went undercover just like they did in the time of the Visigoths. They just stayed quietly Jews and openly whatever they were obliged to do. At this time, the Rambam is in Fez, and he's learning by Rabbi Yehuda Kohen. There was a big Rosh Yeshiva at that time from Fez. Him and his father and his brother. His brother's name is Rabbi David. They're learning by this Rabbi Yehuda Kohen. Interesting why in Fez the Almohads weren't yet that strong. But at a certain point, Rabbi Yehuda Kohen was taken for interrogation, and he was beaten until he would say that he would accept Islam, which he didn't do, and he died on Kiddush Hashem. In the middle of the night, the Rambam and his family, they fled from Fez. They fled first to the Holy Land, and then to Fusfat, Cairo, as we know. That would be the story of the Rambam, and the reason why he fled because of the Almohads. But the story doesn't end here, because at the time when he was in Fez, there was some guy, some tzaddik or some big person that wrote a letter. All the Jews that stayed living back here in Andalus and in the cities of Morocco that they had to profess being Muslims in the open, that their learning is not a learning, that Torah is not a Torah, the mitzvah is not a mitzvah, and they lost all the Yidden, they lost all cheshik and wanting to stay Jewish. So at this time the Rambam took it upon himself to write what we know is called the Geras Hashmat, or the letter of apostasy, famous Geras Hashmat, that he writes to them that Chaz v'Shulam, everything every mitzvah that it's possible to do, and Hashem gives credit for you get there's a schus for everything that you do in a mitzvah. As much as they can keep, they should keep. Yes, he says it will be better if a person can arrange himself and pick himself off and leave. That would be a better choice. But in the meantime, if they don't have that choice, then they should at least keep whatever they can in the manner that they can. This was very, 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 very important letter. He put himself very much in jeopardy because he also was in a Muslim country at this time. And he writes to them also that Islam is not really considered Avodah Zarah. So it's not considered Yehari Yava, but it's still not the ideal option. But and also that he writes, if I remember correctly, he brings the Gemara that says Shmona Avida the butler, that Shmat, it'll pass. So just talk it out and you'll survive. And if you have the means, get yourself out of there. That was the Rambam's way of dealing with this situation. So we talked about Chizdayib and Shaprut, which we will see his house in Chayen. He was the first of the Jews that we know. On the way, we're going to be in a place called Ubeda. Now we know that in Ubeda there wasn't much Jews living there, only 2.5% of the population. But they uncovered something quite amazing. They uncovered an old mikveh with a shul on top of it, which is very rare, because even the old mikvahs that they do find, like in all over from the Middle Ages, was never connected to a synagogue. Again, maybe here it was different because it was a very tiny community, so maybe they put everything like all in one, or maybe it was just a private synagogue. We'll see on a private mikveh. We'll try to figure that one out, and then we're going to be an Alisana, because there we'll see some remnants of old Beis Chaim, where the Rif and the Megash and the other big tzaddikim, Yitzchak guys that lived over there, how they lived and how they died in this area of Andalus, Al-Andalus, like the Arabs used to call it. And yes, that's the story in short. We're on our way back now. We're on a road, beautiful road here in the mountains. And if you would like to book a tour guide, anywhere that has something to do with Jewish culture or whatever, just go to info@zafir.be.